Okay, if you've ever chased that heavy groove metal tone, that just searing, uncompromising aggression of Pantera, you know that sound is, well, notoriously tricky to capture. It's built on this wall of very specific solid-state amps. But there is this one little red box that promised to somehow put that entire wall of sound right onto your pedal board. We're talking about the MXR DD11 Dime Distortion. So this is our deep dive into some serious engineering ingenuity. We're going to crack open the source material here, really try to figure out exactly how Dunlop Manufacturing, through their MXR custom electronics line, managed to translate Dimebag Darrell's massive, almost razor-sharp Randall amp tone into this portable pedal that came out back in 2004. I mean, how do they bottle that lightning without it just, turning into a muddy mess? Okay, let's unpack this, maybe starting with the core objective. What was the mission here?
Right. Context is absolutely everything with this one. This wasn't MXR just throwing another high-gain pedal out there. No, this was a super targeted collaboration with Dimebag Darrell Abbott, one of the most, let's face it, celebrated and specific-sounding guitarists in modern metal history. So the goal was never like trying to copy the usual creamy, warm saturation you might get from a high-end tube amp. Not at all.
Exactly. Yet when you talk about Dimebag's sound, you are talking about his Randall amps, the RG100 to Century 200 heads. And those things are famous for just sheer volume, but also incredibly tight response and this really aggressive, almost non-forgiving solid state kind of clipping. So the DD11 needed those razor sharp highs. It needed lows that were tight enough to stop any kind of little flub and that really distinctive high gain crunch.
Yeah, and that sonic signature, that solid state thing, it's about instant response. There's no tube sag, no compression like you'd expect. It just clips immediately. And that gives you that percussive attack that really defined that whole groove metal sound. So trying to replicate that really rigid, tight character in a pedal, which, usually kind of smooths things out, that was the essential mission. That was the challenge.
It's important to remember this wasn't like their first attempt at working together. This pedal came right after the success of the Crybaby from Hell pedal, the DB01. Dimebag was really invested in getting this distortion sound right. He'd apparently even used a prototype of an MXR Dime Distortion preamp in his live rig before this pedal came out.
Which really showed his commitment. And, well, it gives the final pedal this immense emotional weight, as you know. The DD11 was actually one of the very last signature projects that Dimebag personally signed off on before his tragic passing later that year in late 2004.
Yeah.
Which basically sealed its fate as, a historical artifact almost right away.
Okay, let's shift into the architecture then, because this is really where we find the foundation for that solid-state tightness everyone talks about. The core circuit, what we find in the sources, it's based kind of loosely on a high-gain op-amp distortion design. It is, let's be clear, unapologetically aggressive. It's a clipping-heavy, solid-state circuit, definitely not trying to be a tube emulator.
Right, and that high-gain op-amp approach, that's crucial. That's what let them directly model the characteristics of those Randall heads. So unlike pedals maybe trying to sound like a Marshall or a Fender, the DD11 needed to give you that huge, almost painful low-end punch, but also make sure the upper mids could still slice through a really dense mix. If you were playing this through a cab, you needed it to sound and feel like a full physical stack,
Physically, it looks pretty cool, too. It's housed in that classic, bulletproof MXR metal chassis, but they gave it that really striking red chrome finish. And Dime's CFH skull, graphic Cowboys from Hell, right on there. A clear nod to his history. It runs on a standard 9-volt supply, battery, or adapter. And importantly, it features true hardwire bypass. Built like a tank, basically, ready for the road.
Yeah, definitely built tough. And speaking of the physical details, there's actually a great little fun fact we pulled from the sources. It really emphasizes the personal touch on this collaboration. If you actually open up a DD11, the internal PCB, the circuit board, it has this small message printed right on it. Get your pull!
Classic Dimebag.
Yeah. His rallying cry, it just reminds you this pedal wasn't only a product, it was a dedication.
That's a fantastic detail. Okay, now let's get into the controls, because this is where the real innovation happens. This is what defines the DD11's success, I think. Most distortion pedals back then were pretty basic, right? Gain, tone, maybe volume. This one gives you 5 knobs, and 2 of them are these key EQ shapers.
Precisely. So you have your standard output, which is just master volume, and then gain. And the gain range itself is massive. It goes all the way from a kind of gritty, crunchy rhythm tone right up to fully saturated, just spitting metal fuzz. But then you get to the EQ section. That's where it gets interesting.
Right, you've got the tone knob. Now, we see tone knobs on tons of pedals, but on the DD11, the sources say it's an active EQ tilt control. Why is that distinction active? Why is that important for listeners to understand here?
Because active means power.
Yeah.
A normal passive tone control, it just rolls off high frequencies, that's it. An active EQ, like this tone control, can actually boost or cut frequencies pretty dramatically. It gives you way more sculpting capability. So you can use it to aggressively push your highs for like cutting leads or really reinforce those deep lows for heavy rhythm work.
Yeah.
Much more versatile.
Okay, gotcha.
But then we get to the fourth knob, when everyone talks about the real game changer, the scoop control.
Yeah. What's fascinating here is this dedicated control over the mid-range. The classic dime tone is pretty much defined by this massive dip in the mid-frequencies, right? That scoop sound. Before this pedal, if you wanted that scoop sound from a pedal, you're usually just stuck with whatever fixed internal setting the manufacturer decided on.
And usually if you scoop the mids that hard, you just kill your articulation. Your sound turns to mush, especially playing with a band. So if this pedal is supposed to capture a really articulate groove metal tone,
Yeah.
how did MXR engineer that common problem? It sounds like a contradiction, a super scooped and articulate tone.
Well, that's the triumph of the design, really. The scoop knob doesn't just blindly cut all the mids. It adjusts a specific, pretty narrow mid-range notch, so it lets you tailor the exact frequency being cut. And crucially, the rest of the circuit was clearly tuned to keep significant upper mid focus and clarity around that notch. They basically designed the circuit to sound tight and percussive even when you crank that scoop knob all the way. You get the feeling of that massive low-end weight without the actual low-mid mud that kills definition.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because that controlled scoop, that solves maybe the biggest problem that plagued high-gain solid-state pedals back then. I mean, think about the Boss Metal Zone, right? Hugely popular pedal, known for being aggressive, but also kind of infamous for that buzzsaw or fizzy character when you scoop the mids too hard.
Right, exactly. The DD11 is still one of the most aggressive production distortion pedals from that whole era. Definitely rivals the Metal Zone in terms of sheer gain. But critically, it achieves a much, much tighter low end and a more organic-sounding, controllable EQ curve. The DD11 gives you almost surgical control over exactly where that chainsaw sound lives, stopping the tone from becoming just, chaotic noise. So when you actually listen to the resulting voicing, it really is exactly as advertised. It's tight, it's percussive, it's got massive lows and cutting treble.
But those scoop mids are somehow controlled, disciplined. They're not flubby, which is like the curse word for high-gain players, right?
Definitely not flubby. And despite its really rigid solid-state foundation, the sources do note that the dynamics are surprisingly responsive. You might expect a pedal this saturated to just be an on-off switch, basically. But apparently, it reacts pretty well to your pick attack. If you play softly, you get a little more grit and slightly less saturation. And if you roll back your guitar's volume knob, it actually cleans up a bit, which is a real testament to how carefully they must have tuned that op-amp stage.
Okay, so if we connect this to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
its application, this pedal basically puts an entire high-gain amp channel right there on the floor. So presumably, it has a pretty specific preference for what kind of amp you plug it into.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, while it was obviously designed primarily for dime-style metal rhythm, lead playing it really needs a clean foundation to work best. It shines when you plug it into solid-state amps or tube amps set very, very clean. You essentially treat the pedal as the amp's high-gain channel. Let it do the heavy lifting.
Right. I was going to ask, could you use it to, push an already dirty amp?
Yeah.
Like a booster?
You can technically, but the results might get a bit unpredictable if the amp is already cooking too much, deep into its own distortion. What it does do successfully, though, is push an already dirty amp, maybe one that's just breaking up into proper ultra-high gain territory, but without just stacking up more fuzzy, unwanted mid-frequencies. It tends to sort of clarify the distortion rather than simply making it muddier or compounding it, which is probably why it got picked up not just by groove metal players, but also folks in industrial, modern hardcore, even some early gent players who really needed that precision attack, that tight response.
Okay, moving into its legacy. We've already touched on the emotional weight surrounding its release in 2004. That initial demand, obviously fueled by its unique sound, but also undeniably by the tragedy of Dimebag's passing, it quickly made it a really highly sought-after item.
Indeed it did. And while Dunlop did release other Dime signature gear later on, the DD11 itself was eventually discontinued sometime in the early 2010s. Which, of course, just cemented its collector status even further. But historically, its importance really goes beyond just the signature factor. The DD11 is crucial because it really accomplished two big things at the same time. First, it kind of bridged that 1990s solid-state amplifier tone, that huge physical Randall sound, with the practicality of 2000s pedal boards. Before this, if you wanted that specific sound, you pretty much needed the whole amp. There wasn't really a pedal that nailed it.
Right. And the second reason, the technical one we've spent so much time on, is that it fundamentally shifted how manufacturers thought about designing high-gain pedals.
It really did. It basically introduced mid-scoop EQ as a dynamic, controllable parameter. It normalized giving the player actual control over that specific frequency notch. And that innovation, that really set a new standard for high-gain tone sculpting in pedals. It moved things away from those frustrating fixed EQ curves that so many players hated.
And you could see the direct influence of that scoop control concept on later MXR models, right? I'm thinking particularly of the full-bore metal, the M116. That pedal pretty much adopted the same core idea, having a dedicated control specifically for dialing in that perfect mid-range notch. So the DD11 wasn't just a signature pedal, it was kind of a blueprint.
Yeah, definitely a blueprint for a certain kind of high-gain approach.
So what does this all mean? Looking back, the DD11 Dime Distortion really stands as more than just a tribute pedal, even though it's a powerful one. It's really a cornerstone of modern high-gain pedal design. It successfully engineered a very specific, highly aggressive yet articulate tone profile into this small box. And it proved that sometimes maybe solid-state precision can be superior to tube warmth when you're chasing a specific iconic sound like Dimes.
Yeah, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the DD11 really shows the value sometimes of abandoning that constant trend of just tube emulation. Instead, focusing on highly targeted, purpose-built, solid-state circuitry can yield amazing results for certain sounds. Dime's tone was defined by its tightness, its attack, its solid-state character. And the DD11 circuit just delivered that rigidity precisely. It didn't try to sound like something else entirely. It succeeded because it sounded exactly like what it was modeled after those Randall amps. It really does raise an interesting question for you, the listener, to consider then.
Given how successful the DD11 was at capturing that massive solid-state amp tone in just a small box, does the ultimate pursuit of iconic high-gain tone rely more on clever circuit ingenuity and advanced control like that genius scoop knob than it does on just sheer tube wattage? Or maybe, is our collective worship of the tube amp sometimes missing a specific, necessary flavor of aggressive sound that only solid state can really deliver? Something to chew on next time you plug in.